Nick Robinson.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Nick Robinson, BBC News. Two, if I may. One specifically on RBS that you raised. Are you suggesting that the decision of RBS has no consequence, or do you accept that by moving their base to London, tax revenues would move to London? In other words, Scottish taxpayers would have to make up the money they would lose from RBS moving to London. And on a more general point, John Lewis's boss says prices could go up. Standard Life's boss says money will move out of Scotland. BP's boss says oil will run out. Why should a Scottish voter believe you, a politician, against men who are responsible for billions of pounds of profits?
Well, can I start? No, let us answer, and I'll be able to perhaps do a reverse question to the BBC's role in these matters, which I'm sure Nick will be perfectly happy to explain. Firstly, can I just correct... Can I correct you on a factual point, Nick? The corporation tax does not depend on registered office, but on economic activity. For example, our estimates on corporation tax for Scotland at the present moment don't include the profits of NatWest or any of the Royal Bank's operations anywhere else in the UK, just because the brass plaque is in Scotland. That's not how corporation tax works. Now, I've seen a number of quotes from various people who should know a great deal better, but that is how corporation tax is allocated. It's not allocated where your registered office is, it's allocated on economic activity. That is the rules of corporation tax. In terms more generally of this issue, let's go into the generality. I think the people of Scotland have moved beyond these warnings and scaremongering, particularly when there is a clear evidence that while the Prime Minister was busy telling us what a wonderful nation we were, his business advisor was busy desperately trying to get any business he possibly could to say something negative about independence. I thought it was quite interesting yesterday, and I know this might be news to some of the metropolitan media, that the warnings which were released yesterday were actually a recycling of things from months ago. Bob Dudley, for example, if I remember correctly, made exactly the same statement in February, and Standard Life made exactly the same statement 3 months ago. I know that it was news to some people, but it certainly wasn't news to the people of Scotland. But let me turn very specifically to the question of the Royal Bank of Scotland. I've read you the statement to staff released this morning from the Chief Executive of the Royal Bank. I've read the whole thing, so in the relevant paragraph, just let me briefly remind you. It is my view as Chief Executive that any decision to move a registered headquarters should have no impact on everyday banking services. This is a technical procedure regarding the location of our registered head office. Based on current strategy, it is not intention to move operations or jobs. It's not a matter of operations or jobs. It is a technical matter in the opinion of the Chief Executive of the Royal Bank of Scotland. I've also heard many times on the BBC the argument that Lloyds Banking Group are about to move their headquarters to London. I would have thought, given the headquarters of the BBC in London, that the BBC might have known that Lloyds Banking Group has their headquarters in London, has had for many, many years, and has no jobs in its registered, attached to its registered office, which is, of course, a plaque in the Mound, which is there not incidentally to do with the Bank of Scotland. It's there because of Lloyd's takeover of the TSB many years ago. So I then come to what I think is now the most interesting matter, which is who in the Treasury, because I have here a screen grab from the BBC last night. I don't know if this was you, Nick, or one of your colleagues. A Treasury source told the BBC that it had discussed the plans with the Royal Bank of Scotland. The Treasury officials or ministers are not allowed to brief market-sensitive information. Market-sensitive information, and it's a basic rule, cannot be released prior to the market announcement at 7 o'clock this morning. The Royal Bank of Scotland share price changed overnight. This is a matter of extraordinary gravity. I've always respected, and I would continue to respect, the journalistic right to maintain and protect sources. But I know that the BBC will want to cooperate with the inevitable investigation by the Cabinet Secretary into the briefing of this information. Given the briefing of information, even if we weren't in a referendum campaign, even if there weren't Purdah rules which are meant to apply to government, the briefing of market-sensitive information is as serious a matter as you possibly can get. And therefore I know the BBC, in its impartial role as a public sector broadcaster, will give full cooperation to that investigation. Now, can I go back to our friends in the international media, please? This is an international... Sorry, Nick, I'm going back to our friends in international media. Please, there. I mean, I'll tell you what. Well, I've just read you the statement. Well, right, and I answered that question. Nick, this has been a lively campaign with heckling at many meetings across Scotland. This is the first opportunity the BBC have had to heckle at a meeting. Congratulations, Nick. I answered you. The corporation tax is based on... Yeah, remember the first part of the question? The corporation tax is based on economic activity, not on your registered office. In, for example... Yes, Nick, please. In, for example, the statement I've given you, and, for example, in the Scottish Government calculations of corporation tax, we do not count the activities of Royal Bank of Scotland in London or NatWest or elsewhere. It's based, Nick, on economic activity. That is the rules of corporation tax. And given that the Chief Executive of the Royal Bank of Scotland has said this does not involve, even if it happens, the movement of operations or jobs, and it is, after all, a contingency, but wouldn't involve the movement of operation and jobs, then clearly it would have no impact on personal tax revenues either. And I know that we'll want to report the very sensible statements from Angus Grossart and also from Martin Gilbert of Aberdeen Asset Management this morning. Not saying how they will vote, because that's a private matter for them, but pointing out in their estimation as two giants of the Scottish financial sector that the Scottish financial sector will prosper under independence, as indeed they believe it would prosper under any circumstances. So I think that's a reasonably comprehensive answer, Nick. And then, of course, I know that given I've given you a comprehensive answer, we'll have the full cooperation of the BBC in the inevitable inquiry which will now take place. Can I go to our friends in the international media?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was fascinating. This referendum campaign was already a pretty ferocious tussle. It just seems to me to be becoming more and more intense, with what was already a pretty fractious argument over the impact of the potential decision by these banks to relocate their registered headquarters and whether or not that will have any impact. There's already quite a Barney about that. Now that has gone up another level by this accusation from Alex Salmond that, in effect, the Treasury deliberately leaked the information about RBS to journalists last night, basically to unsettle the nationalist camp, to basically undermine the nationalist case. Now, speaking to folk in the Treasury, they vehemently deny this. They describe Mr. Salmond's claims as, quotes, absurd, a desperate distraction tactic. Their version of events is that they were contacted last night by journalists who were asking the Treasury about a statement put out by Lloyds Bank, who had indicated they were going to relocate their legal home. And in the context of that conversation, questions were asked about RBS, to which the Treasury responded. In other words, the Treasury version of events is, we didn't put this out here in the public domain. It was journalists who started it, journalists who asked the questions, and that is how the information came about. But it just gives you a sense of how extraordinarily charged this whole campaign has become. and into which, bluntly, the BBC and the sort of what Mr Salmond calls the metropolitan media have been dragged, because Mr Salmond has accused us, the so-called metropolitan media, of deliberately peddling what he calls scare stories. And this was his response to my colleague Nick Robinson when he asked Mr Salmond about why the people of Scotland should trust Alex Salmond's version of events against people who run banks and other institutions and are in charge of billions of pounds. This was Mr Salmond's response.
Who in the Treasury, because I have here a screen grab from the BBC last night, I don't know if this was you, Nick, or one of your colleagues, a Treasury source told the BBC that it had discussed the plans with the Royal Bank of Scotland. The Treasury officials or ministers are not allowed to brief market-sensitive information. Market-sensitive information, and it's a basic rule, cannot be released prior to the market announcement at 7 o'clock this morning. The Royal Bank of Scotland share price changed overnight. This is a matter of extraordinary gravity. I've always respected, and I would continue to respect, the journalistic right to maintain and protect sources. But I know that the BBC will want to cooperate with the inevitable investigation by the Cabinet Secretary into the briefing of this information. Given the briefing of information, even if we weren't in a referendum campaign, even if there weren't Purdah rules which are meant to apply to government, the briefing of market-sensitive information is as serious a matter as you possibly can get. And therefore I know the BBC, in its impartial role as a public sector broadcaster, will give full cooperation to that investigation.
Well, why does this all matter? Well, it matters very obviously because the financial sector is such a big part of the Scottish economy. It also matters because of credibility. Who do you believe? Do you believe Alex Salmond or do you believe the Treasury? Let me suggest also that Mr Salmond is perhaps not too discomforted by this row, because for him it enables him to present himself as the underdog, standing up to the Westminster politicians who he accuses of bullying tactics, and also standing up to what he regards as an overmighty London media.
This week, reporters have flown to Edinburgh from all over the world. But Alex Salmond knows that for victory, he needs to reassure voters at home. Why should a Scottish voter believe you, a politician, against men who are responsible for billions of pounds of profits? He didn't answer, but he did attack the reporting of those in what he called the metropolitan media.